Dawn split the ridge with a pale red seam and a single rifle crack stitched through the stillness. A brown bear lurched from the tree line, shoulder torn and steaming in the cold, each step branding the snow with a dark, uneven trail. Frost-laden pines stood rigid as sentinels, while distant footfalls advanced in disciplined rhythm, metal brushing canvas, breath hanging like ghosts. Above the white amphitheater, a bald eagle traced slow circles, reading the ground with old intelligence, riding the sharp lift of katabatic wind. The river lay sealed under a skin of blue ice, murmuring beneath its prison, guiding the wounded body toward lower, thinner air. Nothing announced mercy here. The rules were written in hunger and weather. Yet the gaze from the sky did not measure weakness as opportunity. It measured intrusion as trespass. The mountain listened, storing the echo of that shot deep within granite, as if preparing to answer in its own voice. Boots entered the page of snow and began writing an impatient story. Powder parted around leather and steel, and shallow drifts whispered across the hunter's shins, hushing every careless shuffle. They read the bear's wound in color and pattern, arterial splatter, staggered stride, weight shifted away from the torn shoulder. Wind dragged the smell of propellant into the birches, then curved it back over the ice, announcing direction to any creature that understood consequence. The valley narrowed, funneling sound into a tight corridor where every breath returned amplified. The hunter's plan was simple arithmetic: distance, elevation, line of fire, solved by glass and powder. Above them, the eagle hovered just outside certainty, a dark signature against the whitening sky. It watched how men moved when they believed the world owed them trophies. It watched the bear choose the creek bed over the ridge, not out of panic, but strategy, following the weakest light downhill, where shadows could hide a shaking flank.
Light matured into a hard silver, sharpening every edge of ice and bark. The eagle slid across a blade of wind and found a thermal born from water still moving under glass, a secret warmth lifting it with minimal effort. Below, the bear's breath pulsed like a metronome of survival, steady despite the injury, every exhale fogging the rhyme on low reeds. The hunters adjusted straps and scopes, confidence steadied by practice and the cold's anesthetic clarity. Snowmotes twirled in the air like filings obeying a magnet, aligning to currents that most eyes never learned to see. The ridge carried a faint tremor from somewhere beyond sight, a subterranean hum braided with ancient pressure. The eagle tipped a wing, reading that tremor the way sailors read a swell line. The mountain seemed to close ranks, narrowing options into a single corridor where risk would be forced to declare itself. Intention gathered, invisible yet heavy as storm glass. The frozen creek held the landscape like a seam of dull metal, the surface mapped with fractures that glinted blue and black. The bear reached the undercut bank and leaned into dirt and roots, anchoring trembling legs against the slope. Muscles twitched beneath winter coat matted by blood, a rough lattice glistening where snow had fused to heat. Steam rose and dissolved, and with it went the last scent of autumn, replaced by iron and pine pitch. The eagle settled on a low snag, talons silent on bark, body shaped to the wind like poured bronze. Silence pressed down until the scrape of a bolt and the clink of brass broke it, close now, decisive. The bear shifted its weight, angling the wounded shoulder away from the open channel, head low, eyes narrow with the arithmetic of corners and cover. Survival reduced to angles and timing, the creek's brittle membrane waiting to betray weight or to swallow noise.
Snow sighed under advancing boots, then burst as the eagle folded its wings and dropped like a thrown blade. Air detonated around its body, feathers flexing, tail splayed, vision locked on the forward hunter's exposed cheek where the scarf had slipped. Impact ripped through fabric and skin.
The man pitched sideways, rifle skittering and painting a bright scratch across the ice. The formation fractured, instinct overruling choreography as hands flinched toward faces and muzzles swung without aim. A fury of wing beats filled the narrow corridor, throwing powder into blinding halos that erased depth and distance. The bear surged from the bank, not toward the men, but across the creek's scabbed surface, using the chaos as cover. Echoes ricocheted between trunks, every sound misread, every shadow promoted to threat. For a heartbeat, the hierarchy inverted. The aerial sovereign declared the border, and ground-born hunters hesitated inside a territory suddenly older than their certainty. Shock bled into calculation. The wounded hunter bound his cheek with a strip of wool gone crimson at the edges, breath serrated, eyes watering from cold and pain. The others widened their spacing, closing ranks without clustering, muzzles low to avoid sweeping one another. They marked the eagle's aggression as anomaly, yet filed it under hazard, balancing risk against pride, distance against dusk. The bear, already across, pressed into a corridor of black spruce where needles drank sound and released resin like medicine. Snow here was grainy and shallow, shaped by wind that tunneled along the creek bed, carrying scent away from the line of pursuit. Above the dark boughs, the eagle traced a patient ellipse, conserving strength, counting movements, reserving violence for precision. The valley narrowed again, bending the trail toward a gully where wind piled old drifts over buried trunks, a place that punished speed and punished hesitation more. The hunt continued into constriction.
Mid-morning thinned to a color like ash diluted in milk, a flat glow that erased contrast and turned distance into suggestion. The bear favored the uninjured side, testing each patch of snow with a measured press before committing full weight. Blood fell now in smaller commas, dried along the edges where cold had lured the wound's rhythm. The eagle rode low, tipping between branches, occasionally lifting to a line of thermals leaking from rock faces that drank sunlight even in winter. In the hunters' chests, heartbeats standardized to the cadence of practiced breath, but impatience threaded their steps. Scents braided along the gully, cordite softened by frost, sap wounded by cold steel, the mineral bite of ice about to fracture. Far off, the river under the ice shifted its tone from murmur to throb, a subterranean drum answering the footfall above. Something in the geometry of wind and stone began aligning events toward collision. Memory walked a staggered pace behind the men, dragging older winters into the present. Photographs nailed to tavern walls showed antlers spread like chandeliers, hides stretched square and flat, grins made hard by flash. A different creek, a younger season, a black bear fallen clean under a clear shot, the applause of friends, the story polished each time the glass refilled. Those nights ran hot, this day moved cold, and pride traveled poorly through frost. The leader had promised clean work, a quick finish, a mount worth the fuel and the miles, yet the valley kept editing the plan, exchanging clarity for fog, confidence for grit under eyelids. Tracks that should have guaranteed closure now threaded toward places the map rendered vaguely. The eagle overhead reduced their figures to moving problems. The bear ahead translated pain into deliberate movement. The ledger of trophies and ghosts began to balance, numbers drifting toward red. The gully pressed into a corridor where ice glazed roots and bowed grasses into delicate scaffolds, each filament sheathed, each curve ready to snap. The bear slipped once and recovered, claws scoring dark crescents through the surface crust, breath cutting in shorter bursts, eyes fixed on a wedge of shadow that promised depth and windbreak. The hunters slowed to spare ankles and optics, steps shortening, balance lifting from heel to forefoot, weight shared with poles. No bird calls threaded the air here. The forest shut its mouth and listened. The eagle climbed to a higher rail of sky, then stalled, reading a seam of turbulence that rose from a distant, unseen slope. A hush grew heavy enough to acquire texture, as if the valley had lined every surface with felt. Under that hush, a small crystal fall slithered from an overhang,
sounding like a fuse that someone had already lit. A last man rifle steadied against a trunk, muzzle stationed at the gap between spruce where the bear would emerge. The sight picture settled, crosshairs correcting for pulse, wind, and pride. The eagle cut across the opening, body low, wing edges barely clearing the needled fringe. The trigger began its travel, a smooth press rehearsed 1,000 times. The bear stepped from shadow and shifted left, not to charge, but to cover the descending blur of feathers, interposing bulk between pellet and wing. The shot cracked, bark detonated in splinters, a branch died instead of the bird. Snow leapt and fell in a glittering veil that recaptured silence. The hunter blinked at the misfire of intention, understanding too late that patterns had inverted and roles refused their assigned names. The bear held ground, chest heaving, head canted, and the eagle rose into the safer air, their movements braided by a wordless, undeniable alignment.
The storm arrived without announcement, gathering itself out of fragments of mist and temperature shifts. Snow thickened until direction lost definition, a white suspension where sound fell short of echo. The hunters paused beneath an outcrop, faces iced over, eyelashes catching crystals that melted into slow tears. Their breath became a metronome in the silence, 4 human hearts marking time inside nature's stopped clock. The bear moved unseen through the obscured valley floor, a dark motion inside whiteness, its path traced only by the subtle collapse of drift. Above, the eagle glided invisible, shadowless within the storm's diffused light, its cry carried sideways by wind until it returned from the wrong direction. The mountain absorbed everything, smell, noise, intention, and converted it into stillness. Visibility dissolved into sensation alone, a hiss of air, a shifting cold, a pressure that felt sentient. The storm was not camouflage but witness, documenting each heartbeat as evidence. The wind changed register, pushing snow in diagonal sheets that mimicked movement. The hunters relied on instruments now, a flickering compass, a map gone soft at its folds, a digital rangefinder blinking false numbers. Beneath their boots, the frozen ground emitted a low resonance that seemed to answer their steps, as though the valley pulsed in countermeasure. The bear advanced deeper into a ravine where the storm's voice became muted percussion. Icicles clinked against one another, chimes formed by accident and physics. The eagle followed the tonal pattern, banking along gusts that built and collapsed unpredictably. Every sense layered, gun oil beneath leather, sweat beneath frost, and beneath it all, the mineral tang of fear newly awakened. Somewhere in the snow's roar came a hollow thud, not thunder, but something heavier shifting under ice, mass relocating in secret. The storm had turned language into vibration, and vibration into instruction. Everything was being guided inward.
The ravine ended in a shallow cave, framed by roots and icicles like organ pipes. The bear entered first, dragging a faint crimson wake that dulled as the wound congealed. The air inside was warmer, perfumed by earth, wet stone, and the faint decay of moss still clinging to life. Drops fell rhythmically from the ceiling, creating concentric ripples in a half-frozen pool. The eagle landed at the mouth, half illuminated by the swirling snow beyond. Its feathers shook once, scattering droplets that glowed momentarily before disappearing into shadow. Outside, visibility continued to erode, the hunters reduced to silhouettes moving through a single hue of gray. The bear's breathing steadied, each inhale a negotiation with pain, each exhale a defiance of expectation. For the first time since the shot, the mountain's noises quieted into something approaching rest. In that pause, endurance took form, raw, wounded, but entirely unwilling to yield. The storm's outer edge moved east, revealing a sky streaked with pale violet and a drifting moon that resembled smoke through ice. The eagle perched at the cave's threshold, head swiveling with the fine mechanics of survival. Its eyes caught faint glimmers,
reflections of scopes and glass hidden among the trees. The hunters had regrouped, their figures half submerged in snow, advancing with methodical patience. Inside, the bear shifted, testing weight on the injured limb, deciding whether to flee or defend the chosen refuge. Heat rose from its fur, fogging the entrance and momentarily obscuring the watcher. Beyond the ridgeline, a whisper of wind struck the treetops, producing a note too low for calm. The eagle adjusted its stance, reading the vibration through the branch underfoot. The valley was tuning itself again, frequencies aligning toward consequence. For now, only the watchers, skyborn and earthbound, understood that silence could also be a signal. When the storm cleared entirely, only 3 sets of tracks led toward the ravine. The 4th ended abruptly beside a snow-laden cedar. A glove, a scrap of parka fabric, and disturbed powder formed the outline of an event without explanation. The hunters called once, a name reduced by distance to a single syllable, then decided the cold would answer better than any echo. Beneath the cedar, drag marks veered toward the dark edge of the gully and stopped at nothing. Snow fell inward, smoothing evidence until absence became the only certainty. The remaining men pressed on, superstitious silence replacing command. The bear stirred within the cave, restless without knowing why, as if the air had thickened with memory, not its own. Above, the eagle rose higher than usual, wings cutting through dawn light that suddenly felt metallic. Somewhere beneath the crust of snow, something unseen shifted position again, slow, patient, deliberate. Morning unfolded brittle and bright, each crystal reflecting enough light to blind. The leader adjusted his pack, feeling muscles tighten against the cold's grip, jaw locked in pragmatic rhythm. The missing companion lingered as an equation unsolved but postponed. Survival was arithmetic, not sentiment. The bear emerged briefly, testing air currents, then withdrew, guided by instinct older than the tools arrayed against it. The eagle traced wider spirals, conserving energy, surveying the valley like a strategist. Every footprint they left compressed the snow into small memorials of intent, evidence of trespass soon to be erased by wind. The mountain appeared indifferent, but beneath its crust, the earth shifted minutely, preparing new architecture. Men, beast, and air all moved according to invisible design, intersecting lines drawn by something vaster than understanding. The rhythm of pursuit continued, each side both predator and prey, each heartbeat another step toward an unknown convergence.
By midday, the bear's strength faltered. Heat gathered beneath the crusted fur where infection had begun to bloom, a slow ember against winter's glass breath. It licked at the torn flesh with low growls that steamed into the still air. Snowflakes landed and melted instantly on its side, evaporating as if tasting fire. The eagle dropped low, wings stretched like a canopy, watching the tremors run through the animal's frame. Far off, the hunters paused at a frozen ridge, checking bearings and rations. Hunger crept between them faster than caution. The valley distorted perspective. Distances folded, echoes returned smaller than their sources. Time stretched thin, vibrating like the skin of a drum. Beneath that vibration, the bear's pulse synchronized with the mountain's deep thrum, a union of wound and will. Fever became energy, pain translating into motion, drawing it onward even as the body betrayed its own endurance. Afternoon carried static. The snow's upper layer developed a faint shimmer, charged by friction between wind and crystal. Each gust produced a crackling whisper, a warning disguised as beauty. The hunters felt it in their teeth first, a metallic taste of oncoming electricity. The eagle sensed it in the membrane of its wings, adjusting flight to ride the rising tension. Clouds massed in unnatural geometry,
purple shadows folding over blue ridges. The bear trudged beneath that sky, fur bristling with trapped sparks, every breath visible as short-lived flame. When lightning finally split the air, it struck beyond the river, yet the shockwave rattled needles loose from distant firs. The air trembled afterward, momentarily weightless, then heavy again with ozone and prophecy. Nature was winding its clock, storing energy across unseen wires of atmosphere. No participant, man, beast, or sky, could yet name the rule that had been rewritten.
Later, as wind dropped to a deceptive calm, the leader examined his compass. The needle rotated without pause, circling like a predator in a cage. Metal had lost its obedience. Maps followed suit, edges curled, ink bled at contact with snowmelt, direction unraveling in quiet rebellion. The bear moved in what appeared to be circles, but was in fact alignment with safer elevation. Instinct navigated where instruments failed. The eagle glided over their path, shadows stretched thin and long across the whitening ground. The hunters argued without sound, gestures sharp, frustration bitten back by cold and superstition. Somewhere in their midst, a strange harmony persisted. Every error they made tightened the orbit around their quarry. The mountain had recalibrated gravity itself, pulling everything toward a single invisible center. Above, air pressure thickened enough to blur horizon and sky, fusing them into one field of uncertainty that refused to be read. The first tremor arrived disguised as echo. A rifle stock tapped against stone, and snow detached high above, a small sigh magnified into prophecy. Powder loosened in sheets, gathering volume as it tumbled down unseen chutes. The hunters froze, reading the sound too late. The bear halted beneath a ridge of compressed drifts that had been fragile for weeks. The eagle wheeled overhead, issuing a shrill that cut through the muffled air like a blade warning its sheath. A heartbeat later, vibration passed through root and rock, an invisible wave spreading outward, shifting balance across acres of slope. Snow began to crawl before it learned to fall, then cascaded with increasing speed, an ocean turned vertical. The valley inhaled, then gravity exhaled. In that brief suspension, every living thing understood the same instruction. Stillness would mean burial, movement the narrow chance of survival in a landscape rewriting its surface.
The avalanche did not reach them fully, but its breath toppled trees and cracked frozen trunks like brittle bones. One of the hunters, lagging behind, vanished beneath a falling branch thicker than a man's torso. The others dug frantically, gloves tearing, their shouts swallowed by snow's heavy hush. Beneath the wood, the trapped man's breath rasped through clenched teeth, steam rising in short bursts that froze before fading. The bear crouched not far away, senses tuned to distress not as opportunity, but as echo. Pain recognized pain. The eagle circled above, tracing the perimeter of calamity with deliberate arcs, marking where fear had pooled thickest. When the limb was finally levered aside, the man gasped into light, face ghostly with frost and disbelief. Around them, the forest sagged under new weight, a geography rewritten by seconds. Compassion and calculation stared at each other through the same mask, undecided which would act first. Snow steamed from the bear's back as it watched the humans struggle, instincts at war within its chest. Predation whispered in one ear, exhaustion in the other. The eagle dipped low, feathers brushing wind into spirals that disoriented the hunters momentarily. The wounded man looked up, seeing the silhouette hover like judgment. The leader shouldered his rifle but hesitated, finger trembling against discipline. The bear moved closer, slowly, each step measured through centuries of inherited caution. It leaned its weight against the fallen trunk, muscles straining, shifting the mass enough for the man to crawl free. For an instant, time thinned to a fragile membrane between gratitude and fear. The bear's breath rolled warm against the man's cheek,
His reflection wavered in its dark eyes. Above, the eagle screamed, a single raw note that filled the space between instinct and decision, turning the act of mercy into a target.
The freed man staggered back, gasping, snow staining crimson where blood seeped from his leg. The bear stepped away, body sagging with exhaustion, the price of strength newly spent. Around them, the wind retreated into uneasy quiet. The leader advanced, retrieving the dropped rifle, eyes fixed on the scene as if logic had been reversed. Gratitude flickered only briefly before habit reasserted its command. He raised the weapon, a reflex born of hierarchy rather than hatred. The eagle reacted first, banking into a dive so sudden that even gravity seemed startled. Its shadow cut across the hunter's chest just as he sighted down the barrel. The world compressed to a heartbeat, the inevitable balanced on a breath. Compassion had created exposure. Exposure invited violence. In this frozen theater, the script of survival tolerated no improvisation. The bear turned slightly, watching with a weary understanding that purity and peril often shared the same gesture. Feathers struck the hunter's face, and he fell backward into snow that swallowed sound. The rifle discharged harmlessly into the gray sky. The bear flinched at the echo, muscles coiling despite fatigue, while the eagle regained altitude, wings trembling from impact but controlled. Powder drifted around them in delicate curtains, reducing vision to dreamlike fragments. The wounded man crawled toward his companions, who hesitated to help, fear blurring with disbelief. The valley inhaled again, resetting its rhythm after the shock. The bear turned toward the creek, favoring its injured leg but moving with grim continuity, leaving deep impressions that filled slowly with drifting flakes. The eagle followed above, tracing the same line as before, each wingbeat a metronome of vigilance. Far behind, the hunters reorganized, their unity splintered by something none of them dared to name aloud, the moment when nature refused their narrative. Evening crept down the slopes, turning snowfields into plains of dull silver. The injured hunter sat apart, blood leaking through a rough tourniquet, the stain steaming faintly. The others debated silently through glances, their discipline fractured by exhaustion and superstition. The eagle rested atop a distant snag, silhouetted sharp against dimming light, feathers stiff with frost. It had not flown far enough to abandon vigilance. The bear rested within sight of the creek bend, half in shadow, half in reflection from the frozen water. Between them stretched the residue of an unfinished transaction, mercy unanswered. When the leader finally raised his weapon again, determination looked more like ritual than purpose. The eagle launched downward without hesitation, claws raking across his shoulder, fabric shredding under the weight of impact. The rifle fell, firing once into nothing. Feathers scattered like ash, dissolving into the twilight, marking the border between warning and consequence. The night hardened, temperatures dropping until breath crystallized mid-air. Moonlight spilled across the frozen river, polishing it to a mirror so smooth it reflected the stars with deceptive precision. The bear approached the edge cautiously, testing each step with the logic of exhaustion. Ice groaned beneath its mass, deep notes rolling downstream like subterranean thunder. Across the river, the hunters advanced again, spacing wider, each man reduced to a shadow carrying noise and intent. The eagle moved above the mirrored surface, wings slicing through reflected constellations. From certain angles it seemed two birds flew, one in sky, one in ice, echo and origin bound by gravity's trick. The bear began its crossing, paws splaying, balance distributed with care. The first hunter followed, his boot heel punching through a thin layer that instantly resealed. The river awaited no command.
It was a coin balanced on edge, about to choose. Halfway across, sound changed from creak to crack. A thin fissure spread beneath the hunter's weight, radiating outward in a pattern both beautiful and terminal. The bear paused, ears twitching, eyes locked on the vibration traveling through ice. The eagle soared lower, releasing a cry that merged with the groan of shifting layers. In an instant, geometry betrayed the trespassers, slabs tilted, water surged upward in explosive breath, and men flailed for traction that no longer existed. The bear lunged forward, claws gripping splintering edges, managing to find purchase on a solid shelf near the far bank. The hunters disappeared into chaos of shards and dark water, rifles vanishing first, voices after. Cold, consumed sound, muffling everything into thick oblivion. The eagle climbed through the mist of its own reflection, rising until both silence and gravity could no longer distinguish between flight and escape. Below the broken skin of ice, the river carried its new cargo swiftly. The current twisted bodies and gear together, spinning them into slow vortices beneath opaque glass. Bubbles rose in erratic lines, the only testimony of motion beneath the surface. The bear watched from the far bank, chest heaving, as the water calmed too quickly, smoothing over tragedy with indifference. The eagle hovered above the hole, snow swirling into it like ash falling into fire. For a long moment, the valley seemed to hold its breath. Then the wind resumed, gentle, almost sympathetic, sweeping across the exposed water and sealing it again under a fresh glaze. What had been violence became sculpture. Only scattered footprints remained along the banks, leading nowhere. The river's voice deepened, echoing a verdict that required no language. Everything that enters this current surrenders identity. The night held a heavy, lunar stillness. Ice reformed in uneven plates, each one carrying a dull sheen of buried light. The surviving hunter, perhaps only one, stood on the near bank, trembling from cold and disbelief. He called into emptiness, voice breaking, each echo shorter than the last. Across the river, the bear moved slowly toward a stand of birches, leaving prints that filled instantly with snow. The eagle glided between them, its passage converting distance into connection. The man sank to his knees, the rifle across his lap now just weight, not weapon. His breath created small clouds that collapsed immediately, absorbed by air too cold for remembrance. Somewhere behind him, a crack resounded again, but quieter this time, as though the river were closing the conversation. The sky stretched unbroken above, vast and judgmental, holding no sign of rescue or reprieve. The eagle rose, tracing the curve of the valley until it found a column of rising air warmed by buried springs. Feathers shimmered with frost, each beat scattering light in faint arcs. Below, the bear collapsed against a rock ledge, spent but alive. From the opposite bank, a flicker of movement, one surviving hunter leveling his rifle, caught the moon's edge. The shot cracked through stillness, its echo rolled for miles. Feathers burst from the eagle's wingtip, spinning like sparks before vanishing. The bird spiraled once, maintaining balance through sheer defiance, then steadied itself higher. The hunter watched, uncertain if he had harmed or merely provoked legend. The valley absorbed the report, snow resettling into the silence it preferred. The bear lifted its head toward the wounded sky, eyes following the faint shimmer descending like a fallen star that refused to extinguish, carrying the thin, persistent glow of endurance. Silence lingered after the gunshot until a deep rolling sound rose from the valley floor. The bear's cry, raw and echoing, a vibration that reached the bones of the mountain. Snow trembled loose from branches, cascading in fine veils around the cave mouth. The eagle's body wavered high above, a black shape briefly unsteady against the pale moon.
The surviving hunter froze, rifle limp in his hands, realization dawning that he had fired into something larger than prey. Across the frozen landscape, that roar carried a resonance of mourning, fury, and something older than either emotion. The bear lumbered forward through shallow snow, its wound reopened, each step writing crimson hieroglyphs into the white. The eagle's feathers drifted downward, ghost fragments marking the air between earth and sky. For one long moment, all movement aligned. The bear climbing toward the slope, the hunter backing away, and the mountain holding its breath between them. Morning arrived slow and dim, sunlight refracting through ice dust until the air itself seemed crystallized. The bear found the fallen feathers near a fractured tree, each one still warm at the quill's base. They clung to its paw, delicate relics of defiance. The eagle lay nearby, body trembling faintly, wings drawn close to preserve heat. Steam rose from the bear's breath and curled around the bird like mist made conscious. Beneath them, the snow darkened, thawed slightly by the mingled heat of their proximity. No predators circled, no scavengers approached. The forest watched through a lens of stillness. The hunter's prints, shallow and uncertain, led away toward the lower ridge. Above that path, small chunks of ice hung mid-melt from the branches, their drips counting time. Somewhere deep within the valley, the sound of running water whispered that motion, and perhaps life, had not yet conceded to finality.
All through that day, the bear remained by the eagle, shifting only to adjust its weight or lick the freezing air for scent of threat. Hunger gnawed, but patience anchored it. The eagle's eyes flickered open once, dull gold clouded with pain, then closed again, surrendering to the rhythm of shallow breath. Wind combed through fur and feathers alike, merging them into a single moving pattern. Overhead, clouds dragged their shadows across the ridges, like memories trying to return. The hunters had vanished. Only echoes of boots remained, cavities of compressed snow that no longer led anywhere. As darkness approached, frost crystallized along the edges of the bear's wound, sealing it temporarily in nature's own bandage. Both creatures now shared the same exhaled mist, two forms bound by injury yet united by refusal. The valley, drained of menace, began its slow exhale, letting exhaustion become a form of peace. When the first streak of dawn brushed the horizon, its light turned every icicle into a filament of fire. The bear stirred, lifting its head toward the east, as if the sun's arrival were a signal rather than a cycle. The eagle's chest rose again, faint but steady, the shallow rhythm gaining coherence. Dew beads formed on feathers, then froze instantly, glittering like new armor. The forest exhaled faint fog through its roots, sap thawed in veins of bark. From somewhere deep, the muted knock of melting ice created a heartbeat beneath the snow. The bear stood, testing its weight, head lowered near the eagle's side, watching for another breath. When it came, fragile yet persistent, the world seemed to lean closer to listen. Dawn climbed higher, erasing the wounds of shadow, but not those carved into flesh. Renewal had begun quietly, beneath the noise that once defined survival.
By midday, the eagle stirred enough to move, its wings unfolding with a wince of effort. The bear stepped aside, as though granting ceremony. Each slow beat of feathers lifted snow into brief spirals that sparkled before falling. Blood stained the bird's flank, dried into the down, yet determination remade shape into function. The wind accepted the motion, cradling it with cautious balance. Rising above the valley, the eagle's shadow drifted over the bear, stretching long, then fading into a line of light that touched the ridge. The bear followed with its eyes until the figure merged with sun glare, then settled back into stillness. From the heights, the eagle scanned terrain it had nearly left forever: scarred slopes, broken limbs, and a river sealing its secrets. The air held the metallic scent of endurance, the kind found only where death had been denied but not dismissed. The valley remembered this ascension. On the far ridge, the final hunter moved through snow crust hardened by night. His pace was deliberate, his breath shallow. The rifle carried more from habit than hope. The mountain offered no guidance, only endless white layered upon white. Tracks of men and beasts crisscrossed and vanished under new powder, maps erased by weather's indifference. Below him, movement caught the eye, a dark pulse of motion at the valley floor. Through the scope, the bear appeared diminished but unbroken, the eagle circling loosely above it. The hunter adjusted focus, hand trembling from cold and conscience. In his ears, blood pulsed louder than wind. He found a ledge for stability, sighted, exhaled, then paused. Something about the pairing, predator beside predator, disrupted certainty. Yet habit overruled hesitation. Finger tightened. From behind the clouds, sunlight flickered, momentarily blinding the lens. Fate had lifted its coin, ready to drop whichever side it pleased.
The rifle cracked, its echo bounding off granite until direction vanished. The bullet struck rock, ricocheted, and disappeared into snow. Startled by its own violence, the hunter blinked as fragments of stone stung his cheek. The eagle wheeled away, wings cutting clean arcs through thin air, scattering frost like glass dust. The bear reared, roar trapped halfway between rage and exhaustion, echoing through hollows like rolling thunder. Wind followed the sound, lifting loose snow into miniature storms that obscured everything. The hunter tried to reload, but fingers numb with cold refused dexterity. His weapon jammed. Below, the eagle drew tighter circles, the bear adjusting position between it and the unseen threat above. Time contracted again, each breath framed by the awareness of alignment, three forms arranged on an invisible axis, tension holding them like magnets straining toward inevitable collision. In that alignment, even the mountain seemed to hesitate. The hunter found new footing on a stone outcrop, half buried in snow. He cleared the rifle, chambered another round, and steadied the barrel. Through the glass, the world narrowed to 2 points of motion, the bear's shoulder rising with each breath and the eagle descending through the crosswind. The sight picture wavered slightly, blurred by fog from his own exhale. Heartbeat synchronized with trigger pressure. 1, 2, hold. Below, the bear's gaze turned upward, almost aware of the calculation forming above. The eagle's descent continued, a controlled fall that disguised itself as grace. Snow drifted across the hunter's field of view, refracting light into prisms that fractured focus. When the shot came, the rifle recoiled, but the sound arrived different, muffled, dulled, absorbed by something massive moving beneath the slope. The bullet missed, but consequence had been invited. Underfoot, stone shifted, emitting a hollow groan that answered his ambition.
The ground beneath the ridge flexed, then lurched. Snow peeled from ledges, sliding downward in sheets. The hunter stumbled, boots losing purchase on the unstable crust. The eagle veered off its descent, rising sharply with a desperate cry that cracked the silence like lightning. Below, the bear braced itself against a drift as small avalanches tumbled down the valley walls, merging into something larger. A rumble deepened into a roar, low at first, then vast enough to drown breath. Trees tilted, roots tearing with muffled screams from the soil. The hunter fell to one knee, struggling to steady the rifle even as the slope began to liquefy under his weight. Rocks moved like beasts beneath the snow, rolling, grinding. The mountain was no longer neutral. It had remembered its anger. For a single second before motion overtook sound, all existence reduced to vibration, the planet reclaiming its right to speak.
The rifle slipped from his grasp, sliding across ice before discharging into emptiness. The muzzle flash flared like a dying star, lighting the tumbling snow for an instant. The hunter lunged to recover balance, but the slope gave way entirely, parrying him downward on a river of white noise. The bear pressed against a boulder, snow sweeping around its flanks in waves. Above, the eagle hovered, feathers shredded by the turbulent air, holding position through instinct alone. The avalanche consumed everything: sound, shape, and history, blending them into one sustained exhale from the mountain's lungs. When the roar subsided, the valley lay still again, smoothed to unbroken glass. No figures moved, only faint trails of disturbed powder marking where struggle had once been. The air retained a metallic taste, residue of fear and ignition. Nature had fired its own shot, and the bullet's destination was silence itself.
When the avalanche settled, the valley was unrecognizable, a single, seamless expanse of white, stretching from ridge to river. Silence pressed so tightly it felt like weight, the air heavy with the echo of what had just collapsed. Beneath the snow, the last hunter was entombed among his tools and unfinished intentions, his rifle buried beside him like a relic stripped of purpose. The bear emerged slowly from a hollow formed by luck and instinct, its fur glazed with ice, its body trembling from exhaustion. The eagle perched on a half-buried branch, feathers plastered to its body, chest heaving with shallow breath. Together they surveyed the transformed landscape, survivors by accident or design. Steam drifted from the bear's nostrils, freezing mid-air, the only motion against the static wilderness. What had once been pursuit now resembled aftermath, a tableau carved from stillness. Somewhere beneath that fragile crust lay the cost of every miscalculated act. Hours passed before the valley remembered sound. Snow settled deeper, sighing into its own cold memory. The eagle shook itself free from clinging frost, wings creaking like stiff leather. Below, the bear began to dig, not toward escape, but in a restless search for reassurance, scraping through layers of ice that yielded nothing but silence. The avalanche had erased direction, replacing tracks with a uniform blankness that reflected the sky's vacant stare. Even wind seemed reluctant to return, whispering only when pressed by gravity down the slopes. When it finally came, it carried a faint smell of metal and pine, a scent too sharp to belong entirely to nature. It drifted between the two survivors, stitching them together in the shared awareness that they were alone. Around them, the world had folded its noise inward, hiding it like a secret too dangerous to speak aloud.
By twilight, the bear found a rock outcrop rising from the snow, its underhang hollowed by years of melt and freeze. The opening provided refuge, dark enough to conceal movement, yet wide enough for air. The eagle followed, landing near the entrance, talons scraping sparks from granite as it settled. Inside, the temperature rose slightly, heat trapped by stone's patient density. The bear collapsed against the wall, chest heaving, eyes half closed but alert. Meltwater trickled from above, forming a shallow pool that reflected both survivors in fractured ripples. The eagle leaned toward it, dipping its beak, the movement slow, deliberate. Outside, stars began to appear, small wounds in the black canopy, bleeding light into the snow. The mountain, calmed by its own violence, exhaled wind through narrow gaps, creating a tone low enough to resemble breathing. Within that cavern's stillness, the rules of hunter and hunted dissolved entirely. Night deepened into velvet, soundless and pure. Frost formed on the stone walls, spreading in delicate constellations that mimicked the sky beyond. The bear slept fitfully, limbs twitching in dreams that smelled of blood and river water. The eagle remained awake, eyes reflecting distant starlight, feathers shifting subtly with each exhale of the wind. Outside, the snowfield cooled to a uniform sheen, smooth as metal under moonlight. No scent of man remained. The avalanche had buried every trace of intrusion. The valley began to reclaim its shape through quiet accumulation, drifts leveling, branches straightening, air clearing of gunpowder's residue. Each minute erased another fraction of violence, until nothing distinguished this night from those before it. Only 2 sets of breathing persisted, measured and patient, proof that life could survive even inside the grammar of ruin. The mountain's heart beat slower, translating chaos into equilibrium. Balance had returned, but not forgiveness.
Before dawn, movement stirred again. The eagle flexed its wings, sensing the shift in temperature as the sun prepared to rise. It stepped closer to the bear, tugging gently at the coarse fur near the wound, a motion both urgent and strange. The bear stirred, confusion flashing before comprehension, a summons disguised as irritation. It rose shakily, shaking snow from its back. Light seeped through the cave mouth in pale threads, illuminating the raw edges of survival. The eagle hopped outward, glancing back only once before taking flight into the brittle air. Its cry was brief, but carried conviction, a sound that demanded response. The bear followed, staggering through snow that came nearly to its chest, drawn by something beyond hunger or habit. Together, they crossed the reborn plain, footprints imprinting a rhythm that matched heartbeat to wingbeat. 2 survivors joined by shared instinct rather than species. The morning sun unveiled a valley remade by its own fury. Jagged ridges of ice traced the paths of the fallen snow, shimmering like veins of glass under gold light. Scattered along the surface were fragments of what the avalanche had devoured: a rifle barrel, the torn strap of a pack, a single boot half buried at an angle of surrender. The bear paused beside these artifacts, sniffing at the faint scent of oil and metal. The eagle landed briefly near a strip of canvas, pulling at it before abandoning the object to the wind. Neither lingered. Around them, the air carried the faint hiss of melting snow, the valley beginning to exhale after suffocation. For the first time in days, sunlight reached the river's surface, revealing water moving beneath thin ice, a pulse returning. Life persisted not as triumph, but as continuation, unglamorous yet absolute in its refusal to end.
At midday, the bear descended toward the riverbank. Melt channels had opened through the snow, carving narrow runnels that glittered like mercury. The eagle followed overhead, circling lower each time until its reflection touched the water beside the bear's own. The river murmured, unbothered by history, smoothing its surface with each pass of current. The bear lowered its head to drink, cloudy eyes watching ripples distort the image of the sky. The eagle perched on a fallen log nearby, its shadow gliding across the surface, fusing the 2 reflections into one mutable form. In that distortion lay something resembling peace, temporary, fragile, yet earned. The world continued to thaw, quietly erasing its scars. What remained beneath the transparency of water was less about survival and more about endurance, the simple insistence of living things to persist where silence once seemed final. Days later, when the valley's outer edges thawed enough for exploration, a group of locals arrived, drawn by rumor and the disappearance of men. They found scattered equipment frozen in half-thawed crusts, rifles rusted by snowmelt, a broken camera lens glinting like an eye staring back. Footprints overlapped in directions that made no sense, some ending abruptly at drop-offs, others looping toward nowhere. Among the wreckage lay tufts of fur and long feathers, both preserved by cold. The scene resisted explanation. They noted claw marks carved into stone high above reach and talon scores on metal frames. Every detail suggested conflict, yet no bodies appeared. The story would travel soon, embellished by imagination, repeated in taverns until memory became myth. The valley, indifferent to interpretation, waited for snow to return and cover all speculation beneath its neutral, eternal shroud.
Weeks later, a hiker found a camera half buried in thawing snow near the lower river bend. Its casing was cracked, battery corroded, yet the memory card remained intact. The recovered footage, grainy, silent, and brief, showed a wounded eagle diving toward unseen figures amid a blizzard of white. A blur of brown fur filled the frame, followed by static, then darkness. When the clip reached the public, disbelief turned quickly to fascination. Scientists debated authenticity, others spoke of symbolism. For locals, no argument was necessary. They recognized the valley, the slope, the light. They called it proof not of miracle, but of consequence, a reminder that the wild remembers everything. The bear and the eagle became emblems of defiance, of balance reclaimed. Footage faded to black, yet even in silence it carried the rhythm of wings beating against inevitability. By the end of that season, travelers came to see the place once marked by violence. The avalanche's path had softened into a meadow scattered with alpine flowers. Meltwater carved new veins through the soil, feeding shoots of green. The air smelled of resin and thaw, of beginnings. The bear's tracks were long gone, replaced by those of smaller creatures. Above the valley, an eagle circled, not the same perhaps, but bearing the same pattern of flight, the same slow dignity. Local guides told the story in hushed voices beside campfires, their words bending fact into something larger. They said the mountain chose its guardians, that loyalty between species could rewrite nature's laws. Visitors listened, half in skepticism, half in wonder, watching as the eagle vanished into cloudlight. The legend, now weightless, belonged not to evidence, but to air, the one element still untouched by human certainty.
Months turned to a full turning of seasons before people came again. Researchers this time, not hunters. Their instruments blinked quietly under the thawing sun, measuring tremors, wind currents, migratory calls. They spoke in low tones, respectful of a silence that still held a kind of reverence. Beneath their boots, soil yielded softly, enriched by what had once been ruin. They noted that birds nested lower this year, that the river's new course nourished green growth along its banks. At dusk, they caught sight of movement at the ridge, a large shape, solitary, pacing with the ease of memory. The bear, older now, its fur streaked with pale scars, watched without aggression. Above it, a familiar silhouette rode the thermals, wings steady, feathers missing in one patch that marked history's signature. The researchers lifted their cameras, then lowered them again, unwilling to reduce something sacred to data. The valley began to tell its own story through motion rather than evidence. Each dawn, the bear emerged to drink from the same bend of river where the ice first broke months ago. The eagle appeared not long after, descending in widening circles before landing on a fallen pine. Together they occupied the same space, day after day, with an ease that denied explanation. Locals spoke of them in the present tense, as though to name them in the past would invite misfortune. The wind carried faint calls down the ridges, not cries, but signals, ancient syllables of coexistence. Moss grew where rifles once lay. The river sparkled with mineral clarity, unburdened by secrets. In the stillness of noon, the bear would lift its gaze toward the sky, and the eagle would answer with a slow tilt of wings, a ritual preserved only by repetition, not reason.
When the first snow returned,
the villagers carved new figures from pine trunks and river stones. Bears stood upright beside eagles in flight, wings outstretched above their shared foundations. They placed the carvings along paths leading into the valley, markers of reverence disguised as wayfinding. Children pressed palms to the rough surfaces and whispered small promises to be kind to the earth. Artists visited to paint the landscape under silver light, their canvases capturing not the story's truth, but its feeling, the impossible alliance between ground and sky. The wind turned these sculptures into instruments, humming softly as it passed through hollowed spaces where eyes should be. In every carving, the scars remained visible, deliberate lines of remembrance that refused to fade. The legend had migrated from mouth to hand, from fear to gratitude. Even silence began to sound like worship. Winter deepened, and the valley became a cathedral of frost. Hunters from neighboring regions, hearing tales of the mountain's curse, avoided its passes. Those few who approached stopped when they reached the first totem line, claiming that the air grew heavy, that compasses spun as though the ground itself disapproved. The bear no longer appeared daily, but its prints returned after each storm, pacing the perimeter as if maintaining a boundary. Above, the eagle soared low, crossing the valley's edge with each sunrise before vanishing beyond the peaks. Together, they patrolled an invisible frontier, sentinels neither human nor divine, but something enduring in between. The mountain's silence now held authority, a verdict rendered permanent. Snow fell continuously, gentle yet insistent, sealing every trespass, every sin under layers of absolution. Peace had teeth here, and the world remembered to keep its distance.
One clear morning, as light fractured through ice crystals in the air, a new sound joined the familiar. A smaller shadow danced beside the larger eagle, a fledgling, its wings unsteady but eager. The elder guided it through tight spirals above the ridge, each rotation tracing invisible lessons into wind. Below, the bear paused its patrol, watching with eyes half closed against glare. The fledgling faltered once, nearly colliding with its teacher, then corrected, rising higher. The moment stretched, a continuation rather than repetition, proof that what began in blood could end in legacy. The valley seemed to pulse brighter, as though approving. Snow melted a little faster where sunlight touched stone, revealing patches of moss shaped like maps. The story that had belonged to survival now belonged to lineage. Above the whispering peaks, two forms cut their rhythm into air, the old and the new, bound by inheritance of motion. Seasons cycled once more, and the valley aged with quiet dignity. Trees thickened around the avalanche scar, knitting the wound with bark and shadow. The bear's fur dulled with age, its gait slower but still powerful. Each dawn, its breath rose like smoke, the mountain inhaling and exhaling through the rhythm of that steady presence. The eagle's feathers had grown lighter, frayed by wind and time, yet its glide remained confident. Together they embodied endurance, stripped of glory. The world beyond the valley moved faster, machines, noise, forgetting. But here, every minute stretched to ceremony. When storms returned, they did not threaten, they cleansed. Wind scoured memory, leaving only essence. Under the aurora's pale curtain, bear and eagle stood outlined in shifting light, their shadows mingling until neither could be told apart. Nature had achieved balance, and balance had learned to breathe.
Spring came early, and with it, a sudden warmth that melted paths carved months ago. The bear's footprints softened into mud,
then vanished beneath wild flowers. The eagle's nest, woven high among skeletal pines, grew quiet. Locals noticed their absence, yet no fear followed. Instead, they believed the guardians had completed their watch. The river, once violent and secretive, now meandered gently, singing over stones. Moss swallowed the last relics of human presence, twisted metal, empty cartridges, a buckle half dissolved by rust. Visitors arrived, unaware of history, stepping lightly through meadows, unaware they walked atop myth. Each gust of wind carried a faint echo, not sound, but impression. The memory of wings, the heavy rhythm of a creature climbing through snow. Absence became a form of presence, teaching that endings need no witnesses to remain true. By midsummer, the valley turned green again, framed by cascades fed from melting peaks. The air smelled of rain and sap, clean enough to erase everything except breath. Clouds drifted low, brushing treetops with soft edges. The absence of the eagle was most felt in the quiet. No shadow crossing the ground, no shriek slicing the air. Yet that quiet was not empty. It carried the suggestion of return, of something unseen still hovering above perception. At twilight, the river mirrored the sky perfectly. One could not tell where reflection ended. The bear's old den collapsed under thawing ice, sealing its story inside. Wildflowers grew through the cracks, purple and white, trembling under the mild wind. The valley had become its own monument. No plaque, no inscription, only balance restored through the simplest element, stillness shaped by memory, memory sustained by silence.
Years later, maps changed. The unnamed hollow between ridges gained a new title, Eagle's Rest Valley. Cartographers marked it with fine lettering, unaware that the name carried pulse and promise. Travelers came, drawn less by geography than by the atmosphere of awe that lingered there. They stood at the clearing where the avalanche once roared and felt the peculiar lightness of air touched by history. Guides recited fragments of legend, the wounded bear, the defiant eagle, the hunters swallowed by snow. Children tossed pebbles into the river, watching circles spread without interference. The name stayed, anchored by belief more than record. On winter nights, wind still funneled through the corridor, producing a low note that resembled a wing beat slowed to reverence. The valley had accepted its identity, both memorial and sanctuary, a chapter written directly into earth. At dusk, a motion camera hidden by moss flickered on, triggered by movement along the slope. Through its lens, mist curled over the meadow, and from it emerged a broad silhouette. The bear, older, slower, but unmistakable, moved beside the stream. A moment later, a shadow crossed above, expanding into wings vast enough to dim the fading light. The eagle descended, landing a short distance away. For several seconds they stood together, framed by fog, still as sculpture. Then both turned toward the forest's edge and walked, one on claw, one on feather, until the mist absorbed them. The camera light blinked red once, then died. When dawn came, frost covered the lens, sealing that final image inside. Those who later saw the footage spoke softly, as if in prayer. Some legends, they said, never end. They simply learn to disappear at the perfect moment.